Welcome, friends, to the first ever joint collaboration between Innovate Her KC and Keystone Sessions. Can I get some round of applause, some woos? Excellent. I am extraordinarily grateful to be here. Extraordinarily grateful to Kevin and to Craig and to Zeke and the team who tirelessly puts these on. Really excited to see what 2023 brings for us. Yeah, I'm looking at you, sir. What's up? So let's go ahead and get started. First things first. My name is Lauren Conaway. I am founder and CEO of Innovate Her KC. I am also one of the co-hosts of the Startup Hustle podcast. If you listen, let me hear a woo. That's right. Innovate Her KC it's a leadership community. And we serve women, we serve individuals of marginalized gender experience, and we do so with a focus on low barrier to entry and inclusion. We have a very diverse membership, over 6,000 members, and we offer professional development opportunities, we offer leadership opportunities, we promote, support, elevate, and champion women. And just a quick show of hands, how many folks in the audience are members? Hell yeah, that's beautiful. David Nickel, okay. We're gonna have words later. But so Innovate Her KC is a very important part of my life, and I am very privileged to steward it. One of the things that I think about a lot in my daily life is gender equity. But not only that, I try to look at it through the historic lens. I am hyper aware at all times that the work that I do and the work that Innovator does and the work that these women do is only possible because of those who came before us. You know, there are many courageous individuals who fought for equity and fought to be on the right side of history when it came to the representation of individuals of marginalized gender experience. That includes women, that includes non-binary individuals, that includes transgender individuals. We've all fought some battles. And actually, I want to ask the audience, and I see that we do, it looks as though we have some ladies in attendance. Have you ever had a rough experience at work? And I expect to see everybody's hands raised at this point. I'm not just talking to the ladies here, but raise your hand for me if you've ever had a tough time at work. Thank you. That's more in line with what I was expecting to see. Now, I want you to raise your hand if you ever had a difficult situation at work that felt gendered, that you were being singled out. And that is exactly what I expected to happen. You'll notice that almost every single woman in the room raised her hand. And that's yeah. Speaking of, but yeah, so every woman raised her hand. Oh, thank you, love. Women supporting women. Wasn't that beautiful? That's what Innovator's all about. At any rate, so we all raised our hand. We all have experiences. I can look at a woman across the room and know that we have shared experience. We have a lot of commonality in the way that we confront the world and the way that the world interacts with us based on our gender. And so I wanted to have a conversation about those things. It's really important to me to acknowledge what came before, but also to think really tactically about what's to come, what the next steps are. And so my hope today is to have a really organic, authentic, vulnerable conversation with you, not at you, but thinking about things with the particular lens of gender equity and our experiences as professional leaders within the community. So a little bit, I swear we're almost done, but a little bit about the methodology of who you see before you. We have different generations represented. Can I have my boomer raise her hand? That'd be you, Teresa. So we have a Gen Xer / Zennial in the house. You'll notice that we did this in order, chronological order. We have Kaylee, who are you? We have a millennial, and then we have a Gen Zer. But I also wanted to make sure that we were having an intersectional conversation. So intersectionality, for those of you who don't know, and I imagine that most of you do, but intersectionality means that every single individual on this stage, myself included, has a layered identity that changes the way that we interact with the world as well as how the world interacts with us. And so that creates complication and that creates nuance. And so I want to be really clear. I don't speak for all women. None of the individuals on this stage speak for all women. We are going to talk about our shared experiences, but we're going to do so through an intersectional lens. So without further ado, I told you we were almost done, and we're almost done. Without further ado, what I would like is for each of our panelists to introduce themselves. And so we're talking name, a little bit about what you do, and what you represent. And I'm going to go ahead and start at the end there. Hello, Teresa, if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about yourself.
Absolutely. Good evening. Thank you for having me here this evening. It's always a joy to speak to people, and especially like-minded individuals. My name is Teresa Garza. I work for Spire Energy. In that capacity, I handle governmental affairs for them and economic development. Additionally, I was on the county legislature here in Jackson County for 12 years, serving from 2003 to 2012. At that time, I was the first woman and the only Latina to ever be elected countywide. So my experiences what we will talk about will be kind of, I guess, stemmed in that or rooted in that. Thank you for having me again, and I look forward to the conversation.
That was beautiful. Seriously, round of applause for first Everett. Thank you. Let us honor and acknowledge that, because that's huge, my friend. All right.
So I have to follow Teresa.
You got this.
I am Cynthia C. L. Fales. I'm the founder of Launch Crate Publishing. I'm also an author, a story shepherd, a podcaster, and a whole bunch of other ers that we may or may not get into tonight. But before I jumped into the world of publishing, I was an educator. So I'll be speaking from the lens of education and then from my experience in the publishing industry as well.
Hello, my name is Kaylee Peel. I'm the Director of Development for the Linda Hall Library. I'm also on the Girl Scouts board. It's a new thing for me, so that's exciting. I'm coming from the lens of academia and nonprofit work. I've been in Kansas City since 2015, and I've been working in nonprofits since then. So it is a more women-dominated field, and I've got a lot of different experiences that lend to this conversation. I'm happy to be here.
We're just clamoring to hand you a mic.
I'll take two. Hello, everyone. My name is Marisol Rivas. I work for St. Luke's Health System. I'm on the marketing team. I recently graduated with my MBA, so I'm pretty new to the career field.
You're also kind of a finance expert, aren't you?
Well, I enjoy personal finance, so in my free time, I thoroughly enjoy budgeting. It's a pretty fun. Weird.
I don't really know how to react to that, but so I wanted our guests to introduce themselves, but I also want to point something out when we talk about diversity and inclusivity. We satisfy a lot of different elements of that, but it was really important that we bring that diversity of thought to our panelists. So we have, civic leadership, and we have entrepreneurship, and we have academia, and we have finance and healthcare. Each of these individuals up here is someone that I truly admire and respect and adore, but also recognize that they're very multidimensional. And so we're going to be applying a lot of different lenses in this conversation. And I am going to tell you, before we started, I talked to Kaylee here. Some of you may know, some of you probably don't, that Kaylee is an academic and has a lot of knowledge around history and gender studies. And so I told her when she walked in that I was going to ask her the only difficult question of the night. And I'm going to ask I know she had that expression on her face when I asked her. So I'm gonna ask you, Kaylee. I gave her a heads up. I'm not catching her off guard. Set the stage for us a little bit. I want to create some context around the conversation that we're about to have. And I want to ask you, talk about some of the milestones that have contributed to our current state, where we are today.
Sure. So there are a few. We're going to do a quick crash course on women's history. So bear with me. And if you've got any questions, we'll talk about it after. We'll just do that. Clarifying questions. So first I want to note, Lauren, your point about intersectionalism, that's really important to me. So I'm going to make the note that what we're going to be talking about when we talk about women really entering the workforce in the 60s and 70s, that's not really including all women. Women have been working forever. They've been working for a long time, and particularly in the 18th and 19th centuries, a lot of women were in the workforce, and as far as warehouses and factories go, and those were single women, lower socioeconomic women, women of color, and immigrant women. So when we talk about women's suffrage movement or women's liberation movement, that's usually tied to white middle class women. So I just want to make that note now, and I will try to kind of layer that in as we go. But I want to make that note. Women have been working forever. They've always been contributing to the economy. They just were not given the voice or agency that they should have been. So when we think about really the 1900s to the 1930s, there really was no access to education for women. And that's why they were kind of shoved into these kind of unclean and unsafe jobs for the women who were working. But when you get to World War II, there was a big shift in our society because all of our men were going to war. And that really left a lot of holes and gaps for women to fill when it comes to textiles and agriculture, when it comes to larger industry and manufacturing jobs. And when the men came back from war, some of those women stayed in those jobs, but a lot of them were kind of forced back into the household, back into the home. And you think about that because in the 1950s, after the Second World War, there's really this nationalist, patriotic idea of the nuclear family and that we are all kind of living in a cookie cutter, like perfect life. So a lot of women are pushed back into the home, and all those skills and that agency that they might have had in the 1940s is kind of ripped away. But at the same time, this is happening in the 50s. We're seeing kind of an uptick when it comes to technology. So you're seeing more need for jobs when it comes to clerical work, secretarial positions, that sort of thing. So women are slowly but surely coming more into the workforce and working alongside men. Now they're not obviously at the same level as men, but they are getting more of those experiences. They are starting to bring more of an income. The difference that really happens in the 60s is that we're seeing liberation movements across the board. So you've got the civil rights movement happening, you've also got the LGBT liberation movement happening, and you've got the women's liberation movement happening, and that's starting around 1965. That's also around the same time that women are getting more access to birth control. That's key because if women can make the choice as to when they start making their families and building their families, they have more time to start an education or to start working in the workforce. So that starts happening, and then by the 70s, we've got all of our liberations moving is more of a well-oiled machine at this point, and women are getting more access to education. That's happening in the 60s, but really in the 70s, women are able to get a bachelor's degree. They're also able to get advanced degrees, which is huge, because now they're able to come out of education in that space and really have jobs that they didn't have before. So we're talking, and that's happening in Kansas City too. And I had the privilege of interviewing some women when I was finishing up my work. We had our first city council woman, Joanne Collins. She's still around, and she was a woman of color. She's the first person to sit on city council in Kansas City in the 1970s. We're having our first round of women who are getting out of law school, and they're becoming legal aides, they're becoming lawyers. You have an entire population of women coming from all over who are really starting to enter the nursing scene. They're starting to work alongside doctors. Their education is getting stronger. They're getting better experiences, and they're really able to get more broad, attention and representation within the medical field. So those sorts of things are happening in the 70s. And as more women are getting into the workforce, they're realizing they're working within a system that does not work for them. It was literally not built for them. So you're dealing with high levels of discrimination and sexual harassment, equity gaps, and issues of pay. And so we're starting to see not just social ramifications of that, but we're seeing it on a more of a legal side too. So in 1972 is Title IX. 1973 is Roe v. Wade. 1974 is when women are allowed to get credit cards, which is insane. That's a wild experience, I'm sure. 1978 was the Pregnancy Discrimination Act, so that women could keep their jobs and get hired if they were pregnant. So all of these things are happening, which really culminates in kind of that concept of the working woman in the 1980s and 90s. Think like the movie Working Girl in 1988. Women, few and far between, but women are able to climb that corporate ladder and live and exist in these male-dominated fields. But they were very much, and I think we still are dealing with this. This idea, this internalized notion that there's only a few seats at the table. We all need to compete with one another as women to get those few and far between jobs. And I think that really sets us up for what we're dealing with now. In the 80s and 90s, it was I guess the beginning of like hustle culture for women, right? We're really trying to make it, but there weren't any other support systems put in place for women who were working. So women in the 80s and 90s who were getting those degrees and starting to work in the workforce, they were having to make the decision of whether or not they were going to start families. We're hearing those conversations till now. There's still not great maternity leave in a lot of jobs. We're still talking about the access or lack thereof of childcare. And that's now becoming more of an issue because it's not just women that this has affected throughout history, right? We were not taking an intersectional approach the entire time. So people of color, women of color, when we're talking about the pay gap or all of those things, people in the LGBT community. And now when we're in more a modern age, you've got men who are staying at home, who are also not getting paternity leave. There's a lot of issues that we have kind of compounded over the last several decades, where I think that there probably could have been some improvement, but there are some major flaws in the way that we are dealing with today's workforce, and you can see it all laid throughout history. So there's a snapshot. This is just a quick.
Can I get a woohoo for that? Because I want to acknowledge the fact that Kaylee here just synopsized like I don't even know how many years worth of history in like 3 minutes. I can't do that kind of fast math. Don't ask me to do it. But thank you for that. And so now you talked about several milestones, things that happened over the course of your lifetime that were very, very important to women. So I'm going to start with you, Kaylee, because you're in the hot seat right now. But then I do want our other panelists to be thinking about their answers. I want you to think about a historic milestone that affected you as a woman or had implications for you as a woman. Maybe it didn't personally affect you, but think about that and talk to us about what that experience was like to see this happen. And the parallel that I'm kind of drawing, and please forgive me, I'm going to invoke 9/11. And I'm going to say every single person I know who was alive and aware of what was going on at that time knows exactly where they were, and they know exactly what they were doing when they heard the news. And, you hear people when we're talking about the moon landing, when we're talking about Martin Luther King being shot, everybody remembers. And so I'm asking you, did you have a moment like that on your path? And what did it make you feel?
Yeah, I would say that there are probably two. One is more of a landmark. One is kind of a notion that has seeped into, I think, the way in which women have worked together or separately for the last several decades. One would be the kind of lean-in era. That book, Sheryl Sandberg, was 2013, so that's about a decade ago. But the lean-in era, to me, that's what I'm calling it. It's really the Hello. Oh, there we go. The notion is, if you have not read the book, that women need to lean in and, kind of negotiate, talk, work, act like the men, your male counterparts, so that you can get the same sort of acknowledgement, justification, and all those things. I have issue with that because I've seen how that's affected women. We should not be leaning in and thinking and acting and speaking and negotiating like men. We should be dismantling the whole system. And that's like thank you. But we should be dismantling the system because the system, like I said earlier, has not been working. So that it wasn't a landmark, event, but it has really informed the way that I have worked as a millennial in the workplace because I've been very grateful to have women, friends, mentors, and leaders in my life. But on the other side of that, I've experienced, and I'm sure many of us have in this room, we experience kind of the mean girl adult women, the women who they're still believing the notion that there are only 3 or 4 seats at the table. They're not willing to lift us up and support us. They resent us whenever we might surpass them at whatever that looks like. This notion that only a few of us can cling onto that ladder, we're all seeing that play out. And that is a ramification of hanging on to this notion that we have to make ourselves fit into a system that was not designed for us. So that's one. And the number two one, sorry, I'm almost done. The Me Too movement hit me like a ton of bricks. I'm sure it hit a lot of us that way. To be really starting out to get into my career at that time, like a few years before, and to really understand how this is happening to everyone. This also happened to me, and this is going to continue to happen for a long time because that's another system that we have to all figure out how to navigate. Kind of the aftermath of that. Those are the two things that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, and I just little aside from the peanut gallery over here, but Innovate Her was founded on the premise or the belief or the hypothesis that if you provide a platform and a safe, supportive environment for women, then they will be supportive of each other and will be able to strengthen each other. And I think at this point, like I'm like, I proved it. My hypothesis was correct. And I see every day women reaching out to each other, supporting each other, helping each other through this community that we are building together. It's not something I do on people's behalf. It is something that we do with each other. And I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that, because I often, and this is a very internalized misogyny thing, I often have individuals come up to me and say, I'm hesitant to go to an all-woman event. And I'm like, I too went to middle school. I know why you have fear, why you feel trepidation, but it's going to be okay. Our events hit different because we cultivate that environment of support, winning, championship, and psychological safety. And that's very important to us organizationally. Now, I'm aware that I've been talking. So, it's now time for you to tell your story, Miss Garza. Well, so is there a pivotal moment or a historic milestone that affected you deeply?
Coming out of the 70s, I was born in 1970, so not necessarily that I got to see for myself some of the things that happened, but watching my mother, she was a single parent mother, and seeing what she had to go through and the things that she dealt with, and being able to actually go to school, at the time it was a certificate, it wasn't even a degree, and how that impacted and changed our lives was amazing to watch and to see as a child. So I think Title IX, Roe versus Wade, all of that has an impact on my life and what I've been able to achieve and to succeed because of what my mother had to go through, and being able to see that firsthand. I think a lot of it also stems from my grandparents. My grandfather and my grandmother were huge, obviously, powers in my life that helped with my development and my growth. My grandfather was a huge union guy. So I remember as a child going with him to picket lines to help desegregate crews for Kansas City Power and Light. He was with them for 32 years. So I remember picketing with him. I remember a lot of the things that he did with his union during that time, during the 70s, to move the needle and to move things so that it would be different for myself and for my cousins and so forth. I think also stemming on the Me Too movement, I think that did impact a lot of people, because finally it was like I'm being seen. Most of my career has always been in male-dominated fields. I came out of high school and joined the Navy, served 5 years active duty and during Desert Storm. So again, a very male-dominated field. I got out, went back to school, and got my undergrad in criminal justice, worked as a probation officer for 3 years. Again, very male-dominated field, ran for public office. Again, very male-dominated field. And so a lot of the things that have occurred to me throughout my professional career, it was like finally during that moment, I was seen and I was heard. And these were experiences that I didn't, no longer felt alone because other people were talking about them. And so I think those are two of the big things in my life. And again, I would also say just running for office, especially as a Latina, and just some of the things and some of the comments and some of the barriers that were a challenge in order to even win the seat. Often being told that there was no way I was going to win, that I was only going to get 14% of the vote with a last name like Garza. How do you think that's going to play? And so dealing with those type of barriers also, I think, is some of the things that have shaped me. And I do think, kind of chiming in on that mean girl component, is that we don't have time for that, especially as women. We have to help each other, we have to support each other, and we have to lift each other up. And the only way we do that is together. And so I think that's very invaluable in the things that I try to do in everything that I've done throughout my life.
Well, and you're excellent at it. I'm forgoing the mic. Can everyone hear me? Yeah. All right. There you go. Nope. Hey, we know how to improvise. So, and I want to ask you, we are still at a state and moment in time where we are still experiencing firsts. Many Fortune 500 companies have never had a female CEO. We just saw our first intersectional woman vice president. We have yet to see a president. And I'm going to tell you one of the things that I hear often, and this is a piece of a narrative that we have to change. We all have to change collectively. But that narrative that, well, you can't have a woman as a president. She's too unstable. What happens when it's her time of the month? So I want to ask you, you talked about some of the challenges that you have experienced. Talk to us about what it felt like to be the first. Oh, yeah.
Again, some of those comments that were made to me, not just because I was a Latina, but even once I got elected. I was the only woman at that time on a 9-member body. And I literally had comments made to me about, like, I needed to shut up and look pretty. If I couldn't vote the way they wanted me to, then I needed to abstain. If I couldn't do what they wanted me to, then just to stay out of the chambers and not even come to the meeting. So it was that type of stuff that you're dealing with even when I was elected. I mean, I that was 2006, so it's not like it was that far, that long ago, that those were the comments that were still being made to me, and that they just assumed that because I was a woman, that I was just going to go along with whatever they wanted because they were the men and knew what was best. And so when I would ask questions, when I would challenge them, they would get very upset and say things like I was doing it on purpose to make them look bad. And I'm like, no, I've read everything and I'm asking questions because I've taken the time to read what you have given me. And so it's that type of stuff that still exists, right? And at the end of the day, I was elected by a group of individuals that expected me to do that and to be that voice and to ask those questions. And that's what I was doing.
Round of applause for that.
Check.
Nope. Keep it down now. Cynthia, so now we return to the question. And I realize that chunks of time have gone by, so I'm going to remind you, were there any historic milestones or achievements that happened that profoundly impacted you? And I love what Teresa did in bringing her family into it. Are there meaningful moments that impacted your gender journey?
Check.
Which is a ridiculous phrase, by the way.
Meaningful moments. So I've been sitting here trying to think of how to answer this question for myself. I was thinking about it when you sent the question, and I was like, oh, you'll think of something. I haven't thought of anything yet. But I can't narrow it down to any large movements like Me Too. I think about my mother's journey and watching her navigate through the world as a Black woman, and some of the things that she instilled in me, some of the things I got to observe in her that I then implemented into my life that I didn't realize had an impact on me until just the other day when I was chatting with a gentleman about the work that I do and my journey getting to this space, right? Everything that I have done in my career has been from a lens of equity and figuring out or trying to help people learn how to navigate through the systems until we can dismantle the systems and rebuild the systems in a way that work. And everything goes right back to this moment when I was in undergrad at K-State. And I was an undergrad in psychology, and there were 4 Black women that were undergrads in psychology at K-State, just 4 of us. And we used to try to schedule our classes together. So there was a network of support, right? Just as women try to build that network of support, Black women, Latinas, I would imagine probably all try to build that network of support, right? And so we had this network of support together, but then we also had to navigate through the system individually. And I had scheduled a time with my academic advisor, and I showed up early with my classes ready to go, knocked on his door, and he turns and he looks at me and he says, "Are you sure you're one of mine?" And in that moment, I steeled myself and I thought, is it because I'm a woman? Is it because I'm Black? Is it because I'm both? And then I thought, none of that matters. I shouldn't be having this experience. And I looked him in his eyes and I said, I'm not anymore. And I turned and I walked to the admin and explained to her what was happening. And she said, let me call the department head. And the department head had his door open, had been listening to everything. I had no idea. He steps out and he was like, no, you don't have to call me. Just come into my office. So he and I started working together. But from that moment forward, everything that I did, whether it was through education or whether it's through the lens of publishing and helping people tell their stories, what my goal is to help them feel empowered enough to stand up when those moments hit, to speak up for what is right, and to learn how to navigate through these terrible systems that have been created to get to the table where we can speak truth to power, essentially, and start to right the ship.
Yeah.
So that's a long-winded way of saying.
That was absolutely. So one of the reasons that I love having Cynthia as a panelist is because she is so damn talented at expressing her thoughts. Not surprising given that she's a writer and creative, but thank you for that. I want to drill down on something that you said, though, because I think it's something that is probably very germane to most of our gendered experiences. And so my question is, did it feel dangerous? Because you did something that many aren't able, don't feel capable, don't feel empowered, don't feel psychologically safe to do. And you advocated for yourself. You identified a wrong, and then you addressed it. And that's a really, really difficult thing to do, particularly when it happens as a part of a hierarchical power structure, right? So did it feel dangerous? And talk us through that thought process in which you were like, hey, I have to take action now.
It did not feel dangerous to me.
That's amazing.
Only because I was raised to know that people can only have power over you if you give them that power.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just a quick show of hands. How many folks in the audience vibrated with that statement? Now, how many people have actually used that statement or lived and died by that statement? Okay, good. That means that your psyche is in alignment with your belief structure. That's beautiful. I love it. But I will say that not everyone, and not everyone has the privilege, the ability, the capacity to do that. And I'll tell you, so I have stories, I promise. Innovator has like a whole Genesis thing that's very personal to me. It will require cocktails. If anybody wants to take me out and treat me to some drinks, I will tell you the stories. But I came up through male-dominated environments, and I was often I had to fear for my job. I couldn't not have a job, folks. I had to, I couldn't advocate for, or I didn't feel that I could advocate for myself. And I would say that is a very, very common experience for many individuals who are dealing with identity attacks. So I just want to be very clear there. Now,
Can I say something real
yeah,
fast
please
on
do.
that?
Please bring it on.
Yeah, I think that part of it also is because I was elected, so it wasn't a job that they could fire me from, right? So I'm with other men. So my ability to talk back, like when they told me I needed to shut up and look pretty, my comment was like, I can do one of those, but not the other, and it's like being quick on your feet too, that catches them off guard. I had one of my male colleagues who used to always call me darling. Every time he'd see
Gross.
me, darling.
Don't do
so
that.
after about 3 months of me first being elected, I started calling him darling back. That lasted for 2 weeks, and he came and apologized and never called me darling again after that. So I think it's also like how you handle it. I mean, I could have been rude and hateful and mean about it, but instead I'd be like, hey, darling, how's it going? And just give it back to him. And like I said, 2 weeks, he was like, nope, we're not doing that.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And can I call you darling? Okay. I'm asking for consent. I just want to be very clear. At any rate, so now we come to our Gen Zer. And I have assured Marisol to my right here that I'm going to go easy on her. She didn't ask me to. I just told her that I would. But I want to ask you, you actually, as the youngest among us, and you're young and gorgeous, but as the youngest among us, you've probably personally experienced, I would imagine, I would hope, the easiest path. Can you tell us about some of the challenges that you've experienced, in particular those that felt gendered? Have you had experiences like that you could share?
So as far as gendered, I've been very blessed to not have to deal with those issues, truthfully. Yes.
I know. I'm like, we're gonna have like a slide.
Yeah.
how much BS did you have to deal with when you were coming up? And I'm so glad to hear that. Continue.
I think so, yes. Thankfully, no gendered issues there. But I think the biggest issue that I've run into is that people will not take you seriously as a young adult unless you are educated. You know, my mom pushed that since I was very young. You know, you need to go to college, you need to get a degree, you need to be educated in order to provide, you know, your seat at the table. So it was very important to me to make sure that I was going to go get that degree and that I was going to continue to be, you know, educated. So I think that would probably be my biggest.
I'm gonna do what I try not to do. I try to just ask, but I'm gonna put a little bit of a thought process around what you just said. First of all, I'm super glad, and actually one of the reasons that I recently did a speaking gig with an organization called Retail Success. And I asked that question, like, tell me how many of you have had an experience that felt gendered in your professional history. And there was one girl who didn't raise her hand, and she was the youngest in the room. And so that is not the first time that I have seen someone of your generation say, well, I haven't really felt anything. And I'm like, fantastic. That means the system is working. We are all doing our jobs to make it better for those who come after, which that's the goal, right? But one of the things that I hear a lot about is ageism, and how ageism very disproportionately seems to affect women. I was talking to an entrepreneur. She's over the age of 50. She says that at this point in my life, I now actually experience more ageism than I do misogyny. And that has never been true in my life before. And so I'm wondering, the flip side of the coin, as a young individual, as a young woman, do you feel like you have to work harder to prove your credibility with education? Or is it really like that love of learning? Because I do feel like that credibility, the boost has always helped me.
Absolutely. I definitely think that it gives more credibility, but also, you know, the education and then the learning in addition, both of them, they make me I can represent myself better, you know? And I feel like that's so important because people are like, oh, what do you know? You know, you're in your 20s, you don't know anything. And I'm like, oh, I know a lot, thank you. So that's important.
Well, thank you so much for sharing, Mari.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna chuck it back down to Teresa, and I think with our microphone situation, I'm just gonna kind of run it down the line for ease of use. But Teresa, talk to us about some of the triumphs that you experienced on your journey. We already know about one of them, a big one, I would say. But talk about some of the triumphs that you feel you achieved, maybe not based on your gender, but perhaps gender was a factor.
Triumphs. I would say one of the biggest ones was when I was on the county, we pushed really hard to get a MBE WB ordinance passed to help women and minorities. And we also included veterans because veterans often come out and have a lot of like PTSD and stuff, so it's harder for them to kind of function sometimes as far as being able to cope with the civilian sector versus the military sector. And so we did include VBE. And so it took us 6 years, which I found was ridiculous for this to take place, especially in the 2000s when it should have just been a given that we already had something at the county. And the reason it took 6 years, because again, I was one of the only women during that first term, and a lot of my male colleagues didn't understand the reason or the purpose or the need for it. And so we would have people reach out and have coffee with them and everything. And then finally we got to where we were able to finally get them to have public hearings. And so that took a long thing, but we finally got it passed, right? And it was by no means a perfect ordinance, but it definitely laid the foundation for the county to build up on from there. So that is a big one. Also, as somebody who served in the military, I always find it interesting because we'll be at places and they always ask for the veterans to stand up. And people are always shocked that I stand up, and I'm often the only, like one of the few women that's standing up. And people are like, sit down. Like the first time I ever did it, somebody was like telling me to sit down. I'm like, no, I served in the Navy. I have my medals to prove it. I served during Desert Storm. And so I always find that interesting. But it also gives me a great sense of pride that I served the country in that capacity. I think those are some of them. I'm also the first member of my family to actually graduate from college. And again, my grandparents were very adamant about getting that degree and moving on and acclimating into American culture. And so not only do I have my bachelor's degree, but I also have a master's degree. And so that's a huge success, not just for my family, but not just for me, but for my whole family, because now my cousins, they've seen that it's possible, and it pushed them to go on and to get their degrees or to get even higher education, even if it's not a college degree, maybe it's a trade or something. And so that I take pride in the sense that it empowered my family as well as just me.
That's incredible. Thank you. Cynthia, how about you? This is fun. This is fun. Watching
watching me squirm, especially because it's usually the other way around, right? Triumphs. That's what we're talking about.
Particularly through the woman's lens, like as a woman. How do you feel? Tell us about a couple of triumphs, or maybe a big triumph of your career. Oh, I can think of one right off the bat.
Okay,
you just achieved a milestone that most start.
You share that one for me.
You just achieved a milestone that most entrepreneurs do not achieve.
Now 5 years in business.
That's right.
Yeah.
Most startups fail within the first 2 years. Very, very few make it to five years, and you just celebrated that.
Yeah.
And I'm going to share. So I went to the celebration, and Cynthia was up on stage, and I hope I don't embarrass you. I'm going to make her be vulnerable, and for that I apologize.
I'm always vulnerable. It's fine.
Yeah. I'm asking forgiveness later, not permission. But so Cynthia was rightfully very emotional about this 5-year anniversary, but one of the most impactful things was to watch she all of these authors that she had supported. You had congregated them, brought them together, and there were so many women and so many individuals of color around the room, and they had written a book, and Cynthia had empowered that. And it was a very powerful moment watching that happen. And one of them, I think the most interesting things about your journey to me is the fact that you have turned this personal journey into an opportunity to create exponential effect and impact. Mm-hmm. The personal work that you have done and the things that you have achieved, you have turned it into opportunity for so many more. And there's that ripple effect. So that's a huge milestone.
Triumphs, ladies and gentlemen.
Boom, I did it. Well, so talk to us a little bit about that. I'm gonna stick it to you. Mm-hmm. Talk to us about that. How does that feel?
It's good to hear that someone else sees it, because that's my goal with every author that we work with, whether they publish under the Launch Crate umbrella or not. Every story that we put out, every book that we help to create, all of the books that we choose to work on are messages that can create a ripple effect for good wherever they land. So it's good to hear somebody else is seeing what it is that my mission is. Yeah. I'll also tell you, outside of publishing, it's my personal goal to create those ripple effects of change wherever I land, whether it's some of the boards that I serve on, and working to get them to see what equity truly is, instead of thinking of so many people will confuse equity and equality and think that they're working towards equity, but what they're really focusing on is equality, and helping them to understand the difference between the two, and then start to make those pivots in the way that they are approaching the work that they're doing within their organization. That's something that I work towards as well. So maybe those are triumphs. Does that count?
I absolutely
count it.
Come on, let's get a round of applause for triumphs. Here's the thing about Innovator. For those of you who aren't members, but for those of you who are members, you know that celebration is historically and sociologically, I don't think women celebrate ourselves enough. We're always too damn busy. And so we're either that or imposter syndrome's a thing, and it's a real bitch. But it's one of the things that we're very intentional about around Innovator, making sure that we are celebrating the positives and the achievements, even if they're as simple as getting out of bed in the morning. That's a win some days. So let's keep that applause coming. Let's celebrate what this woman has done right here. All right. So I'm very cognizant of time. And we are coming sort of kind of to an end. They're going to get, yep, there you go. And so I want to ask, and I'm going to ask our two youngins, but I'm also going to ask you, Kaylee, because you offer a bit of that historical perspective. What is the path forward You know, we've shared our experiences. Clearly, this is purely anecdotal. It is not even necessarily data supported, but we have experiences of young folk who they've never felt gendered, and that's beautiful. That's what we're driving for. But what is it going to take to make that impact and that change and that trajectory sustainable? And I'm going to start with Kaylee, and then we'll go to you, Maddie.
I think, I know that this was one of the questions that I have been ruminating on for a while, and I think that it kind of comes to 3 words for me. One is accountability. We all have to hold ourselves accountable and the people in our lives accountable to do good work and to be good people and to let that ripple effect really spread out. Authenticity is super important, and I know that that's very cliche. I know people talk about that all the time, but you really have to know and understand and love yourself in order for that to get into anyone else's relationships, and you've got to start to do that. And that also goes with the accountability piece. Know what your values are, know what you're looking for, and then those people will attract to you. And then I would say advocacy. We have to advocate better, and we have to be louder, and we have to be more courageous, and we have to be comfortable with having uncomfortable conversations. And if we don't do that, we will backslide. But the progress that we see today, and the reason why we have a new generation of people who don't experience the things that we've all experienced, is because we've been holding ourselves accountable and advocating, and we've got to keep that going, and we need to do it in more actionable and bigger, braver ways.
Snaps for that.
Yeah.
And Maddie?
Yeah, I can.
I have one.
Hello? Okay. I can definitely agree to that. We we just have to continue to stay true to ourselves and keep our voices heard. We have to keep talking, we have to keep acting, we have to keep doing, we have to keep moving, and we just have to keep reminding people that we are important too, and that no matter, male or female, all of us deserve a seat at the table.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel like your generation is kind of bringing up the rear and they're going to help us get there?
I do think so. I'm surrounded by incredible women.
We believe that children are our future.
Yeah.
I feel like a whole